maybe we should use the PowerPoint. I'm not sure how to advance these slides.
It's okay.
Okay.
Let's talk on.
Okay, great. Okay, so my name is Ann Anderson. I'm faculty at Washington State University. I'm very short. And this is Carrie Dosick, faculty at the University of Washington. And I'd like to acknowledge our co-authors, Nishant and Dr. Osborne, also at the University of Washington. And so, okay. So AECO teams are often geographically distributed. And of course, one of the reasons is because communication technologies today allow us to reach out to talent across the globe. And these teams are often using building information models to coordinate. So we are using technology mediated by technology. And so that adds an additional complication or challenge. And this map actually shows locations of students where our students have worked with those students. So Carrie and I teach in the state of Washington over here. And over the years, they've worked with numerous international students. So let's progress. Okay, so there are 3 styles of leadership that are identified in the literature. And the 2 shown on the left, transactional and transformational, are traditional types of leadership that are observed in face-to-face interactions. And transactional is focuses on task planning and uses rewards and or punishment to accomplish tasks. Transformational leadership uses focuses on inspiring the team, so using trust to accomplish tasks. But and these do translate to virtual teams, but according to Iorio and Taylor, these are not sufficient for working with virtual teams. So there's a 3rd type of leadership, technological leadership, that uses technology to improve collaboration and workflow. So a technological leader needs to ensure, for example, that the technology matches the task, that the team members are not overwhelmed by the technology being used. And so Carrie and I are going to be talking about our paper, which focuses on leadership learning in the context of courses that we teach at our universities. And our students are working with in global teams. And so at Washington State University, it is a 400 level class, a senior level class, undergraduates, 3 credits. And at the University of Washington, it is a graduate level class, also 3 credits. And they had a 6-week term project. These are not simultaneous. These were University of Washington completed their 6-week project and then passed it on to WSU. I'll talk about that in a second. And the objectives for this global team project was to increase student understanding of the practice of distributed project management and BIM execution planning in the context of global team, to expose students to advanced tools for project collaboration and planning, and to help them understand how global virtual design teams can work together effectively. So because of the different start times of the schools and break times, we broke it into 2 parts. So there were 5 global universities participating in this project. In part 1, the University of Washington was working with the Indian Institute of Technology in Chennai. And then there was an all-team meeting where all 5 universities got together, and part 1 passed on lessons learned to part 2. And part 2, WSU, my university, was working with students in Taiwan. So we gave the students real-life scenarios to work with. So part 1 students worked with the flooding, relatively recent flooding in Chennai, and so they needed to produce models, 3D models and 4D models for housing that needs to be built quickly for after the flood. And then In part 2, our students were given the scenario of a typhoon in southern Taiwan. And so again, these models or these buildings had to be built quickly. And we had an example of some of the student work, the 4D model, which we will not be showing because we couldn't download it, it was too large. But you can see that the complexity of the models varied. But this is an example of the models that our students generated. I'll hand this over to Carrie now.
Thank you, Anne. So we are going to, from this part forward, going to be talking about part 1 at the University of Washington and collaborating with Chennai. What we did was studied the learning throughout the project. So in part 1, we actually broke it into 2 projects. We had a 2-week project that was smaller scale. I'll actually scroll back up to show you that. The 2-week project, maybe the top button, the bottom button. The 2-week project was this small scale house, and the idea was to add rooms and think about making it more flood proof or flood resistant. So if there's a way to, you can see they took rooms from the bottom and added rooms to the top, so trying to make more of the house at the 2nd and 3rd levels to allow for a flooding scenario. And then the second was an actual dormitory building being built on the campus. So the students first moved some rooms around on a model just to get their feet wet, and then, not literally, and then the larger project was the 4-week project. So we call this, we're in part 1 now, but now we have project 1 and project 2, so it's slightly confusing given the scenario we're dealing with here. So at the end of each project, we created surveys to measure the students' learning and measure the challenges that they've faced, the strategies they've used to address those challenges, and get a sense whether it's a more positive or negative experience on a variety of scales. So, well, I might as well stop here for a minute too. What we were using for collaboration, what we gave them to use was a tool called Sococo. It's considered a 2D virtual world, if you can think of such a thing. So this is a map, and all the users are represented as little circles, so you're actually a little icon. And surprisingly, lots of the things that you get from an immersive 3D world actually translate to this little 2D environment, because you do feel like you're there together when you see the other dots on the page. And there's some cues in terms of eyes and earphones, knowing that people are seeing your presentation or hearing you in the world. But sometimes the bandwidth to India is not as robust as we would all like it to be. So we gave the students flexibility to use whatever tools that they wanted to. So a number of students ended up not using this tool because of the bandwidth issues and ended up on Skype or Google or other kinds of tools to get connected. In fact, WhatsApp seems to be a big deal in India. All my students the past couple of years have been using WhatsApp. So that was interesting to kind of see how they made choices about choosing which tools to use. And that's part of our finding for this paper is the technology leadership development really came in them helping to navigate how to collaborate with each other, because they're both choosing the platform to collaborate on, as well as the ways to exchange data and information across the project. So when we are looking from comparing project 1 to project 2, that small house to the larger dorm, what we were seeing was that there were some students' teams were less satisfied going from project 1 to project 2, and other teams were more satisfied going from project 1 to project 2. So what was happening there? The negative reactions were complaints about late delivery of models. So the students in India were building 3D models, and the students at UW were building 4D models, so they were reliant upon the models from India to do their work. So they were complaining that their partners were not getting the models on time, and that there was a lack of responsiveness from their student teams. And there was frustrations around this communication technology. The bandwidth issues were a problem. So what we saw then was the student teams that had more positive responses after Project 2 was that they actually had leadership on the team to address the challenges of these distributed collaboration setting. So the teams that felt more successful had more frequent meetings. They recognized they needed to set up meetings and have conversations with their partners. They used a lot of other kinds of communication technologies. They got on WhatsApp and were texting each other daily about their projects. And that they felt that there was a more fair division of work. So when we analyzed this, and I'm not expecting you to read it, more just get a sense of the colors. So what I did was we color coordinated this for you. So the red is technological leadership, the blue is transactional leadership, and the yellow is transformational leadership. So you can see that most of these are either red or blue, being that technological leadership or transactional leadership. So what the students are learning, they have to overcome these inherent challenges in this project. So what they're learning is both how to set themselves up for BIM execution planning and use that as a tool to help coordinate with their teams. And they're also, so there's some transactional leadership of let's set deadlines, let's agree to things as we're working together. And technological leadership, overcoming the communication challenges, choosing technologies that will help their teams collaborate better, figuring out how to host their models in ways that work well for them. So in conclusion, what we see, we're really excited to see a lot of transactional and technological leadership emerging in these projects. The students are really getting a sense through a somewhat painful project experience that the importance of BIM execution planning, the importance of communication and coordination, and the importance of getting everyone on the same page. We emphasize in this class through this project BIM execution planning. When we just do the lecture and the concept of it, everyone kind of nods and say, yeah, that makes a lot of sense. But when they actually feel the project or the pain of the project and trying to coordinate that, they realize at the end of it, I have that light bulb moment in my students' eyes saying, I get it. This was it seemed like such an easy thing to get a 3D model from India, and they realized how hard it was to coordinate that kind of model exchange and development. We found that transformational leadership was less emphasized. That's the goal alignment, and we gave them pretty defined projects where the goals were pretty aspirational. Let's make housing safer in India. So they were already, that was in place well. But the transactional leadership and technological leadership was really the emphasis of this project. So we found that the students that really did use BIM execution planning, learning from project one, the 2-week project, they felt the pain of it when they really then used that tool in project 2 to help their teams coordinate. They were feeling much more successful in the project. But I would hope that even the students that had a more negative experience learned from that negative experience where, oh gosh, I realize we have to set expectations and get people on board earlier. So even though they were concerned, I think they learned a lot. So we want to thank our students from 2016 for their work on these projects, and it's a bit of a messy project, but Simra is going to talk next. She's been one of our partners too. We're happy to talk about distributed teaming across universities and all the lessons we've learned from doing this over the years. I'm open for questions.
So we'll take